Hey guys, welcome to my best of 2013 video. As you might know, I read 65 books in 2013, which is the most I've ever read in a year, so that's pretty cool. I managed to pick 8 books for my top picks this year, and I'm just going to read them off in the order that I read them. So the first one is The Invention of Hugo Cabret. I absolutely loved this book. I loved how it combines art and the plot, and there's so many beautiful drawings, and it's just a really sweet story too. And obviously this and all the other books I'm going to show you, I rated 5 out of 5 stars. The next favorite book I read was Anna and the French Kiss by Stephanie Perkins. I didn't read the edition with this cover, but this is my favorite one, and hopefully I will own the physical edition of this in the future. But anyways, I loved this story. It was just really sweet, and it was one of those books that I just sped through. I do own Lola and the Boy Next Door, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading that. My next favorite book was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This was the first time I actually read the whole thing in one reading period rather than broken up between a year or so, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the story so much. I've seen the movie a bunch of times, and I already want to reread this one. This is not only a favorite of 2013, but a favorite of all time. My next favorite was The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. This is his very well-known Chaos Walking series, and it was incredibly written and very interesting, and I definitely recommend it. The next book was another ebook that I fell in love with, and that's Jellicoe Road by Marlena Marqueta. As I described in a previous video, this was just an incredibly moving book, and I cried a lot, and I really recommend it to anyone and everyone. For number 6, another ebook that I sped through, and that's Fangirl by Rainbow Roll. This cover here is actually the cover of the UK edition that is coming out soon in paperback with some extra drawings of Noelle Stevenson's in the back, which I'm really excited for because I've been following Noelle Stevenson on Tumblr, also known as Ginger Haze, for quite a while, like a couple years. So I'm really excited for her and for me for having read this excellent book. My next favorite is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This was just an adorably cute story and very creepy and perfect for reading on Halloween. And since it's very short, I'm sure I will look forward to reading it again in the future. The last of my top 8 books of 2013 was actually the book that finished my 60 book challenge, and that is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This book was terrifying, but it was so well written and just so interesting and an enjoyable experience as much as it can be based on what the plot is. So I definitely had to include this in my top books. So those are my top 8 books of 2013. I also have some honorable mentions that I want to get in there. Beautiful Creatures by Cami Garcia and Margaret Stoll. I really enjoyed reading this book. It's not the best piece of literature ever written, but I just loved reading it, and I loved the story. I did not like the movie as much, or the sequel to this book, but this one is a good one. Next, I want to mention Les Miserables, and I've said before that this is actually a love-hate relationship because I love the story and the writing can be really beautiful, but there are literally sections about war that go on forever, and the sewage system and the contents inside the sewers, and those parts are less fun, but it's still really beautiful, and I really enjoyed my experience as a whole. Next, I want to mention Persepolis. This is one of the first graphic novels that I've ever read, and it was just a really good, interesting story, and it was good for me to learn more about other people's experiences that I'm not so familiar with, and I definitely recommend this to anyone. I also, of course, have to mention The Cuckoo's Calling by J.K. Rowling, aka Robert Galbraith. I was so excited and surprised when she had released a book under a pseudonym, and of course I went out to get it right away and I loved it, so I can't possibly not mention Jo Rowling's newest book. And then I also just want to mention the books of Sherman Alexie, because I have read a ton of his books this year. I think probably the most widely read author of this year, and I will definitely be reading more of his books next year. Overall, I had a pretty good reading year. I rated 32 of the books 5 stars, which is just about half of the books I read. And then I rated 24 books 4 stars. I only rated 5 books 3 stars, 0 books 2 stars, 1 book 1 star, which was Harkin. If you and I have similar reading tastes and you really trust my judgment, I would just say skip Harkin. Just skip it. And 1 book I gave no rating because it just didn't really deserve one, and that was The Flinch by Julian Smith, I think. The longest book I read was Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Even though I only read 60% of this year, that is still a big chunk, especially considering that these pages are filled with words. In total in 2013, I read over 24,000 pages. Other than Les Miserables, I read a few other really long books. I read the first 4 books in this series, The Wheel of Time, and they are all around 1,000 pages, also very full of words. And I read books 4 and 5 in the Song of Ice and Fire series, also very big. I also counted through all of the short books, like short stories and extra special ebooks like the ones from Neil Gaiman, How to Talk to Girls at Parties, and The Story About the 11th Doctor. And all the short books came to a total of around 11 books. I read 5 graphic novels this year. I read 5 books published before 1900, and I read 17 books published between 1900 and 2000. Before I go, I also just want to mention some of the music I've been listening to this year, since I know I have some tastes in common with a lot of my viewers. One of the first new artists I started listening to this year was Kimbra. When Gautier became well known for his song Somebody That I Used to Know, I became really interested in the female vocal in that song, and her voice is just really amazing, and I love her music. Laura Marling is an artist I've listened to for a long time, and this year I've listened to her album Once I Was an Eagle a bunch of times, so that's definitely in my top picks for music. And the Civil Wars, despite their hiatus, somehow came out with a new album, and it's absolutely beautiful. They're one of my top bands right now, so I really hope that they work out whatever is going on. I also want to mention Macklemore. It's not the kind of music that I would typically listen to, but it's just really catchy, and a lot of his songs have a positive message, so I just really enjoy listening to his album, The Heist. And lastly, I have to mention Lorde. You probably know her best for her song Royals, but it was her song The Love Club from her Love Club EP that I absolutely fell in love with, and it made me want to buy all of her music, which I've basically been listening to on repeat for the last couple months. So there are a lot of bands or musicians I've been listening to this year that aren't really typical for me. I've kind of been branching out, but that's okay. So that's what I've been listening to mostly this year. Let me know if you've been listening to any of those bands and what your favorite books you read this year are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!